Now that we have a custom button, let's use it on our welcome screen. So we go to welcomescreen.js. Take a look. Here's the placeholder for our login button. We're going to replace this with an app button. So let's delete this. That also means we no longer need these styles. So delete. Good. Here, let's add an app button. And we set its title to login. Save. Now we need to bring back the welcome screen. So we go to app.js and replace this expression with welcome screen. So here's our welcome screen. Our button looks good here, but it's so close to the edges of the screen. So I would like to add this inside a container and apply a padding in that container. So back to welcome screen. Here we add a container, a view, and then move this button and the register button over here. Now we set the style to styles.buttons container. Let's define these styles. So over here, we set buttons container to an object. Here we apply a padding of 20 pixels. Let's see what happens. Our button is no longer stretching. Here's the reason. Look at our container. By default, the size of this container is determined by the size of its content. So this view will stretch enough to fit its content. Now, what do we have inside this container? Well, we have this app button, but what is the size of this button? We don't have a fixed size like 200 pixels or 300 pixels. We have a relative size. We set the width of this button to 100% of its container. So this is the reason our view doesn't stretch to fill its container. To solve this problem, we need to apply a width of 100% to this view. So over here, we set the width to 100%. The problem is solved. Beautiful. Now let's replace this with another button. So here's our placeholder. Let's delete it. That also means we don't need the styles for register button. Good. So let's add an app button and set its title to register. Okay, but both buttons are the same color. How can we change that? Well, we can go to our app button and give it a new prop like color. So when using this component, we can set the color to primary, secondary, and so on. Now, by default, we can set this to primary, so we don't have to specify it every time we use this button. Now, look at the background color of our button. We have defined it here outside of our function component. So how can we override it? Well, look at our touchable opacity or our container. In this case, we're setting the style to this object. Here we can pass an array. So in this array, we have one object, that is this button object that defines all the styles. Now, in this array, we can add a second object for overriding some of those styles. So here we set background color to, we go to our color palette, so colors. Now we want to pick a color dynamically. So we want to dynamically access properties like primary or secondary and so on. So here we can use the square bracket syntax to access a property by its name. What is the name of this property? It's what we have over here. So colors of color. Okay, save the changes. Now back to welcome screen. When using the register button, we set the color to secondary. So here's our green button. Beautiful. Now these two buttons are very close to each other. We can solve this problem by applying a margin. As I told you before, margin is the space around a component. So let's go to our app button. Here's our container. Here we apply a vertical margin. So margin vertical, let's set it to 10. That looks pretty good to me. The only thing that we need to fix here is our tagline. So let's give it a bunch of styles to make it look pretty. So back to our welcome screen. Here's our tagline. So let's give this component a style. We set it to styles.tagline. Now let's implement that over here. So I'm trying to sort this as much as I can. We don't have to. So let's set the font size to 25. That's better. Let's make it a bit thicker. So font weight of 600. Good. Now our text is very close to our logo. So let's give it some vertical padding. Padding vertical 20. That looks better. I think we're done with this, but we could make the background blurry so these components stand out a bit more. So look at our image background component. Here we can apply a radius of, let's say, 10 pixels. So the background is a bit blurry. These components are standing out. So I think we're done with this component. Next, we're going to build the card component.